Welcome to Masonic Memories, where we chat with senior members of our lodge and reminisce about events, people, and their contributions to our fraternity. Pull up a chair, grab a coffee, and listen to the way things were back in the day as we meet on the plum, act on the level, and part on the square. United Brethren's activities and involvement with Grand Lodge skyrocketed when Richard Johnson became district deputy. Dick became the highest-ranking Grand Lodge officer from United Brethren Lodge when he became Deputy Grand Master. Let's find out how all this began. We're back down the Cape visiting Richard E. Johnson, and we're going to talk about his Grand Lodge activities and how he became district deputy.
I believe it was in 1984, after my term as master, and I was marshal of the lodge. Grand Lodge was an entity that was so far removed from lodges that everybody was kind of afraid of Grand Lodge, not really understanding how it was organized and how it operated. So I went to Al Rose, who was the district deputy at the time. And I said to him, how does one become district deputy? What's the criteria? What do you have to do? I mean, it was something I was interested in because of my impression of John Gong Moy, who was district deputy when I was raised. He left such an impression on me that I really wanted to emulate that personage. And Al Rose says, well, it's funny you should ask because I really had you in mind to be my replacement. There was a tradition among the district deputies of the Marlborough 24th that when you were going out of office, you would purchase a Grand Lodge purple tie and you would take your successor out to dinner because they would know before you did that you were going to be the selectee. So Al Rose called me up and said, would I have a particular evening available to go out to dinner with he and his wife? So it would be my wife and I and Al Rose and his wife. So we went out to dinner, and during the course of the evening, Al pulled out this box and says, I want you to open this. So I did open it. There was a purple tie, and I said, well, what does this mean? He says, you're the man. So from that point forward, I asked if there was anything I could do to prepare in advance, and he said, absolutely not. That at the Feast of St. John, I would be expected to attend and wear my purple tie. So on the day of the Feast of St. John, I went into Grand Lodge along with a horde of 40-odd other district deputies and successors. And we started through the installation process. And the strange part about it is that this was probably 1985. And everybody was presented with a gold collar, a purple apron, and a satchel, which contained 5 or 6 purple edged aprons, copy of the Grand Constitutions, and a list of lodges. And the Grand Master came down and invested everybody with the collar, and then you were sent out to slay the dragon with no advance information, no instructions, no nothing. Here in 2024, the district deputy goes through a rigorous training process, which I will address later on. And the workload that is put on the district deputies today is probably 10 times greater than it ever was when I was district deputy. So you go through the process of becoming district deputy, and you have to make visitations to lodges for fraternal visits and official visits and go through a ceremony on the official visit as a representative of the Grand Master. Now, you're the representative or his personal representative. You are not the representative of the lodge to Grand Lodge. So it's almost like a separation between church and state. And you're expected to keep, peace and harmony in your district. And at that time, I had United Brethren Lodge, which was my mother lodge, Doric Lodge, Charles A. Welch Lodge, St. Bernard's Lodge, Middlesex Lodge, and Perfection Lodge. And each one had its own series of problems and situations that you were expected to attempt to bring into harmony with everybody else. St. Bernard's Lodge in Southborough was struggling financially and with membership. And the senior warden, who was master-elect, called me one night. And he said, I have a problem and I don't know how to handle it. And I said, well, what's your problem? He said, well, the past masters have called a meeting and they've invited me to attend because they want to discuss the issues within the lodge. I said, okay, here's how you're going to handle it. You call a meeting and you invite the past masters to attend. You're going to be the captain of the ship, not the past masters. So you set forth what you think is right for the direction of the lodge. So he did, and the lodge survived for a few more years.
Remember who that was, Dick?
Kevin O'Donnell. And there were some members of UB that were looking to become active in a line. And at that time, we still had a waiting list to get in. So a few guys went over to St. Bernard's Lodge and got in line over there. One of whom was Sandy McNeil. And he ultimately became master of St. Bernard's Lodge. But UB has always been a source of line officers. We've had members of UB go to Doric Lodge. They've gone to Charles A. Welch Lodge. They've gone to Perfection Lodge to get in line to help with vacancies that existed, and they contributed. Regarding the selection of the marshal and secretary, I had a pact with Dick Carini, who is a past master of UB. And between us, we never knew who was going to be district deputy, but we felt it was going to be either him or me. And if he got the nod to be DD, I was going to be his marshal, and if I got it, he was going to be my marshal. And at that time, there was a bit of a division between Doric Lodge, who was meeting in our building. I decided I would select somebody from Doric Lodge to be District Deputy Grand Secretary. And I selected Worshipful Douglas Curtis Wilds. He was a past master and a well-respected member. And I thought he would be the best choice, which in fact, it was the best choice. He was excellent. He supported me as much as he could because he did travel a fair amount. But he and I became very good friends over the years, as well as Dick Carini. And the 2 years that I spent with those two guys, the memories are just absolutely incredible. We had a great time, a lot of laughs. Carini was funny as hell, but a great asset as far as a district deputy grand marshal. If I had to pick a favorite lodge to visit, it probably would have been Perfection Lodge. The guys at Perfection, which was predominantly a Jewish lodge, and was also Al Rose's mother lodge, were a different breed of characters. And it was interesting to see the governance of that lodge versus what I experienced at United Brethren. I was welcomed at Perfection as well as the other lodges. But there was an association there that existed because of my relationship with Al Rose. So at toward the termination of my term of district deputy, I had to submit names for my replacement. And I really like Sam Sarbella from Charles A. Welch Lodge and Fran Derby from St. Bernard's Lodge. And there was one other one, and I don't remember, it's been so long. But then my replacement was somebody that I did not have on the list because the appointment is actually at the will and pleasure of the Grand Master. No matter who you recommend, it's his choice. So, Worshipful Bill Stoddard from Middlesex Lodge was the heir apparent. And I didn't find out about that until the day of the Feast of St. John. And I walked in and Bill was there with the purple tie. And I said, "You're my replacement." And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, I didn't have the opportunity to take you and your wife to dinner and present you with your purple tie." I said, "But I'm glad that you accepted it. I think you're a good man for the office." At that time, the district used to have a testimonial, and it was conducted at the White Cliffs in Northborough. And all the masters and the wardens and people that you made friends with over the years were all in attendance. And they presented me with a gavel that was about 4 foot long. I finally gave it to the lodge as a memento of my being selected as district deputy. So now I understand that the lodge utilizes that gavel as a traveling gavel. So they are making use of it, which I'm pleased to see that it's not just stuck in a closet somewhere, getting old like the rest of us. When Right Worshipful Al Rose was elected Junior Grand Warden, he had to supply a name to the Grand Master as somebody who would be his pursuivant. And pursuivant for one of the Grand Wardens is very much like being the marshal for the district deputy. And Al asked if I would serve as his pursuivant. My wife and I were somewhat friendly with Al and his wife. So I agreed to accept the position. I was the bag man for Al. Wherever we went someplace, I would always carry his bag, which contained his apron and his pocket jewels. And we went around with the Grand Master for numerous mortgage burnings, dedications, anniversaries, and we went to a lot of social functions when Al was in an official capacity as a Junior Grand Warden. I remember one instance, I had a Lincoln Town Car, and Al didn't like to drive. So I always drove, and we were going down 128, in the middle of a Saturday afternoon, probably around 2:30, 3 o'clock. Traffic was horrendous. And we were running behind time. So the speedometer on my car had a big digital display. And at one point in time, Al Rose leaned over and said, "What does that 80 on your dash mean?" And I said, "Oh, Al, this is a very expensive model." I said, "That's giving us the temperature in Miami at the present time." Our friendship became more than just a fraternal friendship. He was actually like a brother to me. And he ultimately became, as my mentor, to guide me through some of the pitfalls of the Grand Lodge policies and hierarchy and whatever. But, he was a great benefactor to me.
Can you tell us what kind of jokes he told every time?
Yeah. Al used to talk about his mother-in-law. And he said, behind her back, we call her Boots. And I said, "Boots?" He goes, "Yeah, she wears iron boots." So most of his mother-in-law jokes were corny, but they were funny because that was the scale of his humor. And he actually took all of these mother-in-law jokes and put them in a booklet and had the booklet published. And he was selling the booklets with all of the proceeds to go to a foundation that supported one of his grandsons who was terminally ill. Joan and I were asked to help with, I believe it was called pheresis, where we would go to Children's Hospital and sit for a couple of hours hooked up to a machine where they would extract white cells from our blood. In some aspects, we did help his grandson. Grandson did pass away. We were just as devastated as regular family members. We became very close to all of the Rose family. I got a phone call one night from most worshipful Al Ames. And he was still Grand Master. "Richard, I'm going out of office and they've already selected my successor." I said, "Okay." And I didn't know it at the time. I had no idea who his successor was. So he said, "The new guy is interested in talking to you about a Grand Lodge position. You can expect a phone call shortly." I said, "All right." So a couple of weeks go by and no phone call. So we had a vacation scheduled to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. So I had a motorhome, and so we took our kids and off we went on our adventure. And when I got home, I went back to work the next day, and I came home late afternoon, and Joan says, "You had a phone call." His name was Lovey Darling. She's something like that. I don't remember what it was. And I said, "Oh my God." I said, "I think that's the new Grand Master." She said, "Well, you might want to call him back." So I waited until after dinner, and I called, and I said, "I understand you called me." And he said, "Yes, I did." He said, "I want to talk to you about the potential position within Grand Lodge." I said, "Okay." He said, "Is there someplace we can meet?" And I said, "Yeah, almost any place. And he said, well, I live in Wilbraham, you live in Northborough. Why don't we pick a place in between? And I said, okay, but I don't know any places. He says, well, there's a Friendly's in Sturbridge. Maybe we could meet there. I said, okay. So the morning of, I'm driving out there and it's raining cats and dogs. It was raining so hard at times I couldn't see the road. But I found Friendly's, and here's this guy standing under the eaves of Friendly's, and the rain is coming down harder than ever. So I ran across the parking lot, and he goes, "Are you Dick Johnson?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Okay, let's go in and get a cup of coffee." Well, that cup of coffee turned into a 3-hour session. And during that interview, it was never indicated what position he was considering me for. So he was asking me my opinion on various topics. And one of them was, what do you think is the biggest shortcoming of the Grand Lodge organization? I said, do you want me to be honest with you, or do you want me to sugarcoat it? He goes, oh no, he said, you're going to be straightforward with me. I said, okay. I said, when a man is appointed district deputy, you give him a collar and an apron case to go out and slay the dragon. By the time the guy figures out what he's actually supposed to do, he's at the end of his 2-year term, and he's out the door. I said, there needs to be an indoctrination or a training program to properly prepare that guy to be the Grand Master's personal representative. And I said, I think that the Grand Master should also interview his first choice to make sure that the appointee is going to be comfortable with giving up a ton of Saturdays and a ton of nights, all at the request of the Grand Master. And he's suitably trained as to what's expected of him, what his duties and responsibilities are. And so that has some value. And I said, okay. He said, what else? And I said, well, we have this program called the Warden's Workshop. And that's supposedly designed to prepare a guy to become master of his lodge. And I said, I've been to 3 or 4 of the Warden's Workshop. And I said, nothing ever changes. It's all the same guys presenting the same subject. And I said, I could probably recite the entire presentation because nothing ever changes. And I said, I think that the material is stale, woefully outdated, and of little to no value for today's Masonic organization. So he said, well, we've spent a few hours here, and he said, I'm getting your opinion on a lot of things. You have any questions of me? And I said, oh yeah. And he said, well, fire away. I said, well, okay. I said, first of all, there was an issue with the Catholic Church and Masonry. And the Catholic Church is down on Masons. And I don't personally know why. I said, but I think it would be beneficial for the Grand Master to sit down with, at that time it was Cardinal Umberto Medeiros, and try to sort out the differences between the Catholic Church and the Masonic fraternity. I said, would you be willing to do that? Oh, absolutely. And I said, okay. He said, what else? I said, we all know that Prince Hall Masonry is not accepted within the jurisdiction of Massachusetts. What's your opinion on the Prince Hall situation? And he said, you know, they have a charter that was issued by the Grand Lodge of England. And he said, it's a genuine artifact. And some people believe that the charter was lost in a fire. He says, it's not true. And he said, they practice the tenets and the values of Masonry, and I think that they should be recognized as a Masonic entity. He said, however, we can't do that unless they ask for recognition. And he said, a lot of the southern jurisdictions are dead set against recognizing Prince Hall in any form. When in fact in 1946, the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts appointed a committee to investigate the Prince Hall situation. And they made a report that was presented at the Conference of Grand Masters and the Quarterly Communication of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, that Prince Hall was a viable organization, deserved to be recognized, and at all costs, that should be moving forward. Immediately, Grand Lodge of Florida, Georgia, Arkansas, Alabama, and one or two other jurisdictions withdrew their recognition of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, which meant that our members traveling in those jurisdictions could not visit any Masonic lodge. We were not recognized, and we were considered clandestine. So the next year, the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, in order to protect the ability of our members to be received into other lodges around the United States, we had to withdraw the recommendations in that report. That happened in 1947. And fortunately, and I don't recall the exact year, but the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, by the request, or at the request of Prince Hall Grand Lodge, had asked for recognition. I received a phone call after backup. I took a summer the year after I finished my term as Deputy Grand Master, and I read 6 books on Prince Hall Masonry. And I sat down and I made a spreadsheet, and for every major fact that was put forth, if 3 of the books by different authors substantiated the same set of facts, then I declared them, in my estimation, to be true. So I wrote a presentation, and I traveled throughout the district, through the jurisdiction, and spoke in lodges of instruction about the Prince Hall facts that I discovered, from when they started, what they faced over the years. And what was really the most significant factor was, at that time, back in the late 1700s, very few blacks could read or write. So there was only a certain few that it really fell on them, because they knew which way to go. And the Grand Lodge of England went through a reorganization and a lodge renumbering process. And Prince Hall Grand Lodge was never informed of their change in their designator. It used to be called African Lodge Number 1, and they were retitled to African Lodge Number whatever it was, I don't recall exactly. But they were never notified of that change. So the Grand Lodge of England, after a number of years, declared that they were no longer in existence because they never had any reports or money from their new lodge designator, when in fact, Prince Hall never knew that they were renumbered. So Grand Lodge of England revoked their standing as a Masonic entity. Now, at that time, Prince Hall had chartered several other lodges in Rhode Island and New York, I believe. And the controversy was at that time that they were not empowered to charter these other lodges. But it takes 3 lodges to form a Grand Lodge. And there were 3 lodges that Prince Hall Lodge, African Lodge number 1, did charter, and they formed a Grand Lodge and became Prince Hall Grand Lodge. The other Masons were so upset over this that they just disavowed any relationship with them whatsoever. So I believe it was 1992, if I'm not mistaken on the year, I received a phone call from the Grand Master Secretary wanting to know if I was going to attend the quarterly communication of the Massachusetts Grand Lodge. And I indicated I was, and they asked if I would pick up past Grand Master Whitfield Whittemore Johnson and bring him to the quarterly. So I agreed, and I did. And on the way down, I had a conversation with him, and he was expressing his views about the vote that was coming up at the quarterly communication, which would be the recognition of Prince Hall Grand Lodge. And he said, you know, I was the chairman of that committee in 1946 when we put that report together. I said, yes, I remember reading that. And he said, today is a day in history that I will never forget. And he said, I fully expect that the vote will be favorable. And I said, I'm sure that it will be. I've lectured for over a year in the lodges of instruction about the problems with Prince Hall and their recognition. And I said, I hope that it's had an impact on some of these lodges that are coming in to vote. So he said, well, I'm going to tell you something. He said, I never had children, but I have a niece that I'm leaving my estate to when I pass away. And she's married to a black man. And he said, in my estimation, he's one of the finest men I've ever met. And I would hope that the vote passes today, because I would be overjoyed at the ability to call him and say, we're on the right track and we're making progress. So the vote was unanimous that we recognize Prince Hall Grand Lodge. And we established fraternal relations, and Prince Hall Grand Lodge officers do attend our quarterly communication, and sometimes our Grand Lodge officers attend some of their communications. So, and because I'm diverting from the explanation, I think it's very important that we all understand how significant this question was to Most Worshipful Edgar Darling, because in the sense of fairness and justice, it's our obligation to look at Prince Hall Masons as brothers and not an adversary. So he said, Well, he said, we've been here now for 3 hours discussing and solving all the problems of masonry. And he said, it's time we go home. And I said, okay, that's fine. I still had no clue what position he was considering me for. We walked out the door, and it's still raining extremely hard, and my car's across the parking lot. So he says, do you think you could get my car and bring it over? And I said, well, I was going to ask you if you would get my car and bring it over. So he said, well, it looks like it's a Mexican standoff. So I said, okay. So I started out, and he goes, wait a minute. He said, you never asked what position I was considering you for. I said, well, I figured you'd tell me sooner rather than later. He says, you're going to be my deputy Grand Master. Started on my way home, I called my wife on the car phone, and I said, well, I've got an offer of a position. She said, what is it? When I told her, she was very happy for me, but she knew that there was going to be sacrifices made on her end because my time was not going to be much of family time. But she supported me wholeheartedly, which I'm always grateful for.
And then you picked a pursuant.
I did. Well, actually, he was not called a pursuant. He was called Grand Standard Bearer, which is the same thing as a marshal for a district deputy or a marshal for the lodge. You know, he's the bag man. I looked at what I had available to choose from, and I had to have somebody that lived close by who really could afford to take the time, because it was almost everything was an evening obligation, and there were a lot of Saturdays. So we made arrangements with Walter and Carol Vickers to go out to dinner. And during the course of the dinner, I asked Walter, I said, would you accept a position in Grand Lodge? And of course, Walter goes, well, I don't know if I'm qualified. I said, look, just cut it out. I'm offering you the position of Grand Standard Bearer. What's that mean? I said, that means you travel with me a lot. And your time is no longer your own. You belong to Grand Lodge. Walter said, well, sure I would. So Walter and I think in the year that I was deputy, I think we were out 156 nights in addition to the weekends. So I called Edgar one day and I said, you know, we had a 3-hour conversation and little bits and pieces of conversation here and there, but we don't really know each other. I said, you know, maybe we should do something where we could get to know each other better. He said, well, what would you suggest? I said, you play golf? He goes, yeah. I said, let's go play golf. So he says, okay, where do you want to play? I said, your call. He goes, no, your idea, your call. So I said, we'll go to Marlboro Country Club. I said, okay. So I believe it's the 4th hole. The tee box is up, you shoot up the hill, and then it goes way down. And at the bottom of the hill, it takes a dog leg. So when you're teeing off, it's totally blind. You don't know where the tee is if you're not familiar with the course. So we teed off, and we got in a golf cart and went up over the crest of the hill, and I could see 2 balls in the fairway. And I said, oh, there they are. We'll just go up and hit. So I stopped by the first ball and I said, okay, Grandmaster, I think that's your ball. What I thought was mine was further down. And he goes, no, this isn't my ball. I said, oh. So I go down and looked, sure enough, it was mine. He outdrove me. He said, I'll move the cart. So he moved the cart off to the side and he's going, I'll be safe over here, right? And I said, oh yeah. So I wound up and I clocked the ball and I drove it directly into the golf cart. It went around the basket on the back, and up over the seat, and hit the dashboard, bounced down on the floorboard. And he's ducking for cover. So he goes, damn, Johnson, when I told you being Grandmaster was a heartbeat away, I didn't mean my heartbeat. So we had some good times, memories that will always be with me. But I remember I was installed in December, and somewhere around the end of January, first part of February in 1990, I get a phone call. He goes, Brother Johnson, this is Edgar Darling. I said, yes, sir. He said, you remember the conversation that we had at Friendly's? And I said, I do. And he says, well, you talked about district deputy training program. I said, yeah. He said, do it. I said, what do you mean? He said, I want you to create the program. So I said, well, okay. So I sat down for an entire weekend and I thought to myself, what did I not know going in as district deputy? And I wrote out the program, which had to do with protocol, duties, responsibilities, proper dress, how to handle different situations, and so on and so forth. And it became a 3-day course. And it's still being done today with changes as change was necessary. So that's now 34 years ago that the program was authored and still in existence today. So some months after the completion of the first program, we had no budget, and all of the materials, the paper, the folders, and even the coffee and donuts in the morning and the lunches were paid for by myself and other members of my committee. And I put together a team of 8 to 10 guys, and we wrote the lesson plans and we did the presentations. And after a couple of years, I went to Grandmaster and I said, we're paying for everything. I said, don't you think we should have some kind of a budget? Grand Lodge should pick up this cost. And he says, I'll give you $3.50 per attendee for box lunch. I said, that's it? He said, that's it. So for a long time, that's all we did. We had box lunches, but we still, guys on the committee were dedicated, and they put their own money into the program to buy the paper and have the printing and so on and so forth. So somewhere around April or May of 1990, I get another phone call, and he says, Johnson, he said, you did pretty good with the deputy program. Now I want you to do something for Lodge Masters. So I sat down with Bob Leach and Dick Stewart, and we put together the program called the Master's Path, which replaced the Warden's Workshop. And the Master's Path is still going today, although it has changed considerably over the years. All of the things that were put together, instituted, and accomplishments were there because of the love for the fraternity. It was not a personal, hey, look at me. I think it was myself and some of the people I surrounded myself with were able to give something to the fraternity. And I've always had this philosophy that whenever you are chairing a committee, whether it's in lodge, or whether it's in Grand Lodge, or whether it's a building association, the chairman has to surround himself with people that are smarter than him, because they'll make him look like $1 million. It's been a labor of love. I feel that I've contributed a lot over the years, and it was all because of the teaching of the Masonic fraternity that I accepted, and I find to be very rewarding, much more so than somebody who doesn't take an active interest. You know, anybody can be a card carrier, pay his dues every year, and never contribute anything. But the foundation has to be based upon contributions of individuals.
Well, Richard, this was an informative and enjoyable morning here discussing this with you. I believe you're the highest ranking UB member to ever go up in Grand Lodge.
Correct.
And you certainly have contributed a lot to the fraternity.
That ends our chat with Dick Johnson, but we'll have more with him and other prominent members of our Masonic fraternity. We will also have a slideshow of pictures from past parties, installations, and testimonials. See who you can recognize from long ago and take a look at some of those who have passed.